And good afternoon. This is the meeting of the Senate Government Operations Committee for Thursday, February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day. And it would be a good idea for all of us to remember our sweethearts tomorrow in one fashion or another. Today, we're going to resume our testimony on S23. This is the act relating to the use of synthetic media in elections. And we're happy, I think, for the first time this year to welcome in the executive director of the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, Paul Burns. And why don't I suggest we go around the table and introduce ourselves and then give him an opportunity as well. Senator Hart.
Senator Larry Hart, Orange County.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District.
Ryan Collmore, the Rutland District. Jillian is operating, I don't know how they do it, but remotely somehow. And she's our committee assistant.
It's magic.
Tanya Bukowski, Chittenden Central District.
And Becca White, Windsor County District.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, what an honor it is to appear before you in this role, though I have spoken before this committee a number of times with you as a member of the committee. You have. So for the record, my name is Paul Burns, Executive Director of the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, or VPIRG. Senator, we're meeting for the first time, so it is a pleasure to meet you and the other members of the committee. I've had a chance to appear before on a number of different issues, but I will just say VPIRG has been around since 1972. We're the largest consumer and environmental advocacy organization in Vermont. We have tens of thousands of members from one end of the state to the other. And we do work on a broad range of issues, from environmental protection to climate issues, to consumer issues, and certainly issues around democracy. We work to try to make sure that our government is where our elections are easy for people to participate in, that we provide voters with abundant choices, that elected officials represent the interests of working Vermonters, of all Vermonters, regardless of the size of their wallets. And so on those issues, we have achieved a great deal of success working with members of this committee and your predecessors over the years of trying to make our elections quite open. I think it is, I would argue, as easy to vote in Vermont as nearly any state in the nation. I think we should take some pride in that. Senator? Yes.
So my understanding, and maybe this has changed because this is 2-year-old information, was that we were the third most acceptable voting state in the nation.
I'm aware of that study. I actually, there are a couple pieces that they left out that we have done that they didn't evaluate. So I think within our office, we kind of say, well, we still think we're number one, but but there are some, I guess well, we've done a lot of good things together, Senator. And but I guess I would say what that points out is that neither we nor any other state has done all that we could or should do to make our elections process as accessible as it really should be. And so I'm grateful that this committee, your counterparts in the House and the full General Assembly, has taken seriously the idea that our democracy works best when everybody participates, and we should get as close to that as we reasonably can year after year, and always trying to find ways to make it possible for everyone to participate. So again, appreciation for that and the work of this committee and the General Assembly in doing all of that. We've also worked on issues of campaign finance reform over the years with more or less success. I was VPIRG had a role in legislation passed back in 1997 to limit contributions to candidates and limit spending and create public financing of certain races in the state. As everyone here probably understands, that was challenged, and it was I was fortunate to be able to watch the oral argument in front of the U.S. Supreme Court in 2006, 9 years after that law was passed. It ultimately made it to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I watched Attorney General Sorrell argue for part of that time. Right. And then since VPIRG had intervened in the defense of that law, our own attorney also got to argue some of that time in front of the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, our side, the state of Vermont, was not successful in a lot of that, and things have changed, but of course, the Supreme Court could have been different, had different things happen in those intervening 9 years as well. I say that again, just to recognize both the work that we've done and the work that the state has done, always to try to find ways to ensure that it is easy to participate and that elected officials here, we're trying to find ways so that you don't have to spend all your time fundraising. And Governor Dean at that time in his State of the State or inaugural address, I guess, in 1997, talked about the fact that too much time was being spent raising money, which took time away from trying to address the issues of the day. And goodness knows you don't have staff of your, I mean, I don't need to tell you all that you are having to grapple with. So if we could find ways to have our elections funded in ways that are more fair and didn't allow for such great disparities in the influence of some people over others, I think that would be a good thing. And I will get to S23 in just a moment, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your patience. I would just note that this is truly an ongoing issue and is in some ways worse than ever before. I noticed that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was just confirmed by the U.S. Senate.
Oh, no, you're joking, right?
I'm not, and I speak not to his nomination so much as the fact that when he was running for president, as you all know, he had a very wealthy vice presidential candidate on his ticket. And she, in recent days, put out a video threatening any member of the U.S. Senate, but I think particularly Republicans, if they dared to vote against Bobby Kennedy Jr., that she personally would fund the campaigns of someone to run against those individuals in a primary. I think it is.
That's appalling.
I mean, it is appalling, and this is exactly why we have campaign finance laws. That there were and are limits on what individuals can give to candidates, and I would argue, unfortunately, because of more recent decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court that allow the creation of super PACs and unlimited spending and contributions to super PACs from wealthy individuals like that she can go on the air and say, truthfully, I guess, that she will fund a candidate to run against anybody who would dare vote against this person that she supports. It is incredibly anti-democratic. And so it is challenging to move forward in ways that we should to protect and promote our democracy within the confines of what the Supreme Court now allows. But we continue to look for those opportunities. And again, I appreciate your interest in those, and we'll have perhaps a time later this session or biennium to think and talk some more about some of those. That's not the only area of difficulty, though. It is artificial intelligence and synthetic media that many members of this committee have attempted to tackle in S23. I just want to say I applaud your efforts. I don't have a whole lot to say that you haven't already heard, so I'm not going to take a lot of time on this, but I did want to say, as an organization that has worked so long and at such depth on issues related to our democracy and how it might function better, that I appreciate your willingness to take on this issue in this legislation. We do believe that the threat is quite severe, that voters can be misled and intentionally misled. And the technology is getting so good at that it will become harder and harder to know that you're being misled. And we will look back fondly at times where you could easily tell, oh, look at the person, they got 17 fingers or something. I can tell that is AI generated. That's not going to be the case in the fairly near future. And I'm really deathly afraid of what that means for our elections and how we depend on an educated electorate to be able to make informed choices and decisions. And so your effort here to require at least labeling on some of these ads is a step. I think we would love to see them prohibited. And I know that the state is taking some steps to prohibit other forms of, I guess you could say, obscene AI generated material. As you know, the Supreme Court has said we may not be able to define it, but we know when we see a kind of obscenity. Some of this, it is I guess I could argue obscene in the way that it disrupts or corrupts our democracy, and misleads voters intentionally. It's hard to imagine a greater threat. I mean, you've got all the money and politics, a lot of great threats here, but this really is just terrible as I look in the not too distant future about how hard it will be for people to evaluate what's true and what isn't. And then it leads to greater polarization intentionally, and it leads to people believing that they can't trust anything, any democratic institutions. And perhaps that's part of the idea. I mean, I understand now Russia is spending money both for and against certain policies or candidates, not just to advance a certain position or candidate, but just to make people believe I can't trust anything anymore. I don't know, I can't believe anything. And so I understand that there are First Amendment concerns about a prohibition on such advertising or use of synthetic media in this way. You all have to make both a policy decision and upon the advice of legal counsel, your best judgment about what makes sense to do. I will say though that a label alone, a label in English, it only goes so far to prevent the harm that you are obviously concerned about here. And I guess I just encourage you to look as closely as you can about the possibility of a prohibition where that might be possible.
Senator Vygotsky, do you have a question?
I do have a question. And so, we in this committee have talked a lot about, an individual candidate, but what you raised is actually, we're not just talking about individual people. We are potentially talking about foreign governments and foreign entities. And I worry that they may not label it and there's not much we can do about it. And so one of my other concerns around this is how we can hold accountable the platforms that are spreading it. I'm particularly thinking about like social media and if there's a mechanism by which you feel we can or should hold accountable the knowing continued spread of that falsified, artificially created media. And maybe you don't have an answer and that's okay, but
May I just tag on to Tanya's, because it was exactly my question, because the broadcast world has asked us not to hold them accountable. On the other hand, holding individuals, particularly foreign governments, accountable seems sort of a joke. Given that and so I would like us to very much to think about holding the platforms accountable, just because I don't think it's enough to just label them, either that or prohibit them altogether. And I think, we don't have that much to lose by prohibiting them, quite honestly, and see the ones who haven't yet been taken to court. There's one, so anyway, I would love to hear your answer on those three options, because I think we have three options in front of us.
Well, I have to say I'm not a lawyer barred in Vermont, and I can't give you legal advice on that. And there are others who can. And so I encourage you to, as you are talking to Legislative Council, Public Citizen, I know is in here. It's a risk tolerance. Ultimately, it may be a question of risk tolerance on your part. And I'm sure you'll hear from the Attorney General's office on this as well. That because there is both, we are in a strange world now about, you can't even know, going just based on past court precedent of what might be allowed or not allowed, because that seems to be more shifting sands these days. And particularly with the influence of some very powerful people in the world of social media, I'm very concerned about it, and concerned about the possible effect or influence that they may have, not just on policy, but at enforcement, certainly at the federal level, and ultimately on the direction that courts may go in terms of a willingness to allow this kind of prohibition. I believe it's the right thing to do, and there will be some risk attached to it if you decide to move in that direction, which will come probably at some financial expense to the state. in terms of litigation. And you know me, I'm not, that doesn't scare me off from doing or encouraging you to do good things, but I'm not, I don't want to hold myself out as the expert who can give you the best possible answer on that.
Senator Myers.
Yeah, and so I guess I recognize you're not an attorney, and I wasn't gonna say that, but I realized I didn't actually know if that's true. There are a lot of attorneys in this building, so thank you for.
Well, I did go to law school, Senator. I'm just not barred in law. I'm not able to provide legal advice.
But I guess my question is, more from the public interest aspect, what is the threat to the public interest in not doing something, and where do those threats lie? Because as I see it, and I sort of keep coming back to social media, being a place where misinformation can be spread, and I certainly understand there's First Amendment rights, and how in your view do we thread that needle to best protect the public interest?
Mhm.
I'll rephrase my question.
Well, it's certainly clear that candidates for office have always been able to lie on the campaign trail.
Well,
We've seen
that in the
a lot of evidence of that, and that is, I guess, that has been determined to be their First Amendment right. I think an ad that is produced using synthetic media to intentionally mislead someone, not just about perhaps what an opposing candidate has said, but about other realities as well, I guess I would argue, seems different in kind from just the candidate himself or herself, or lying. I think I could distinguish between those things, and here again, I'm not even sure that the language of the bill gets at it as much, because parts of the bill talk about almost damaging the reputation, or synthetic media that could damage the reputation of a particular candidate for office by making it sound as though Senator Clarkson said something that you didn't say, for instance. Clearly, that's one
We've
thing.
already had that this last one.
Yeah, so that is one thing. But what if, in an attempt to influence voters, we have AI generated Elon Musk saying, I think you should support X candidate. In New Hampshire, you had in the presidential primary, someone trying to portray the voice of President Biden. But what if it's not about a candidate at all, but somebody else, that you are misleading people by creating a caricature, or whatever the right terminology here is? I wasn't sure that if that is covered by this language, which refers to a particular candidate, that you're misleading people about a candidate. You may be misleading them about their candidacy by putting out other false information that just doesn't include the likeness of that candidate. So that's one thing that I would consider, that even to the extent that you're trying to get into this realm, because it's, you don't necessarily have to put, misrepresent that single human being as a candidate in order to mislead people about that candidacy.
Right. And we'll have our own attorney, I'm sure, come back in, but I'm just reading in the definition section.
Yes.
Section 2031, it says deceptive and fraudulent synthetic media means media that creates a misrepresentation of an individual or individuals with the intent to injure the reputation of a candidate, to influence the outcome of an election, or to otherwise deceive a voter in a manner that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that answers part of your question, Paul. And we did hear testimony from, I don't remember which witness it was, but there's a very limited number of states which have proposed bans. California, as I recall, is the one that did. And I believe a judge has ruled to stay the law at the moment. So it's kind of on hold, and it makes me wonder whether we have to work on this bill to some more extent, I think. I think there are committee members that feel a certain way. I may put myself in a different category. I don't have any problem with the person that creates the misbehavior being responsible, but I do think, based on at least 4 other entities, including the broadcasters and AT&T and TechNet and some other folks, that extending that to people that are basically just sort of rebroadcasting it, I think does create some other issues. So I don't know where we're going to land. I was hoping that the Secretary of State's office would get together with the disparate interests to come up with a plan if we are going to carve out any sort of exemptions and then come back with that, rather than continue to take day after day after day of testimony. And we've taken quite a lot already. Yes, Senator Clarkson.
Have we asked them to do that?
Yes, informally.
Okay, so we might underscore that and with the AG's office of the secretary, and if they do that. Minnesota and Missouri have complete bans and they have not yet been taken as a challenge.
Okay.
So that's what I was referring to as the other states, because in some ways, rather than looking at the platforms, because I have some empathy for and understand that that would be challenging. On the other hand, I think that if you're going to be a platform for anything, you have to have editors and you have to know what you're broadcasting. I mean, you do have a certain responsibility for what you're broadcasting. I don't care if you're paid for it or not. I mean, in some ways, even more important. So I have very mixed feelings about the broadcasters actually on not assuming any responsibility for what they put up on the air and make money with.
I guess I can speak from real life experience, having had a 50+ year career in
Yeah.
radio. So in most cases, the ad, it's an audio ad for the most part if it's radio. Television, obviously, you include the visual element, is sent from someplace else to the radio station.
Right.
And a production person who could be a 23-year-old, brand new, never did this job before, is charged with loading it into the system so that it can go out over the air. That person, I don't see any way that that person would have the knowledge or skill to decide whether this is synthetic or not. His or her job is just to put it in the system and let it go.
I completely agree. But there's somebody who pushes a green button that says it's okay to run this ad. That is
No, there
where.
isn't.
Yeah, there is. They buy it.
Yeah, well, okay, but
Or
the FCC,
they accept it as a bought piece of advertising.
and again, under FCC rules, they have to accept it. They cannot deny it.
I thought they couldn't deny it.
They can deny it if they don't have
entirely.
anybody on it.
So they could just say, we're not running political ads, and I imagine there are a lot of Vermonters that might think so.
Oh, boy.
Well-
Vermonters would love that. But people across America would love it.
Okay, but now we're getting into some other business type decisions, which, radio stations and TV stations depend on that revenue.
Yes,
So,
of course.
Senator White.
To that point, Mr. Chair, I think we did hear from the broadcasters that they would choose ultimately, if we were to require this of them, to no longer accept any kind of political ads, which I think is a reasonable decision for them to make. And I would not want to see that happen personally.
Yeah, I couldn't. support
Because
it.
I understand your point about the annoyance of hearing political ads, but it is also a very valuable part of how people find out about a candidate or learn a candidate's positions.
Maybe they seem completely not substantive, most of them. And if they're going to be falsehoods represented and lies represented, why should we be enabling that?
Okay, so can I just give you an example? Because I want to make sure you understand kind of what you're advocating for, which is, you know how when we bought that ad in the Valley News with the three of us,
Right.
if one of us was an AI generated image, we would have been asking, and then they found out that actually my hair wasn't red, that actually my hair was brown, and that was AI generated content. And our opponent felt that was an inaccuracy that was somehow benefiting us. They would then be able to go after the Valley News for putting that out rather than us as candidates. So how would the Valley News be able to suss out if that is an AI generated piece of content from just like a PDF or a JPEG image that is sent to them? They would then say, no, we're never taking any of your ads.
I think fundamentally this world has changed. I actually think we're at a point where that level of trust and assumption is no longer possible. And so I think you have to be able to, I appreciate the broadcaster's point of view. I mean, I get what you're saying, but I also think that this is a different landscape we're playing on.
Right.
And that if you are going to accept money for something, you need to have done the work to find out if in fact it is accurate And if it is a real representation of the candidate, independent of what they're saying, are they real people?
But do you remember the game that we played with the New York Times thing? I couldn't tell what was AI and what was not. So we're asking someone who is just as credible in those subjects to make the editorial decision.
Right, and they could tell. They could tell what was AI and what wasn't.
No, I
You
don't
didn't
think
so?
they could. No, they could not. They do not have the ability to do that.
I mean, maybe I hear what you're saying. I'm just.
I know, but so
And
they don't have the
I don't want
ability
to
then.
rein in the conversation with the committee, but
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether Mr. Burns has any further testimony.
So if they don't have the ability to do that, then obviously that's a different thing, but they should have the ability to do that.
Okay, Senator Whitehouse, and then we'll go.
So
back
I
to-
think a really important part of all of this is a piece of the bill that I do believe is in there, and that is knowingly
Mm,
put back out. The knowingly standard is a standard in law that says a reasonable person knew or should have known.
Right.
And so if the technology doesn't exist, and I don't know that I'm totally sold that it doesn't, and it is deemed that no one could have known, then no one's drunk.
Well, more to come on that, I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Getting back to a few minutes ago, you read the definition of deceptive and fraudulent
Yes.
synthetic media. I agree with you, and I just thought there might be a slight disconnect between that and the definition of synthetic media on the next page, page 2,
Yeah.
line 7, which is, if I may, means an image, an audio recording or video recording of an individual's appearance, speech, conduct, or environment that has been created or intentionally manipulated with the use of digital technology, including artificial intelligence. Now, here's the thing, in a manner that creates a realistic but false representation of the candidate. That's where I thought it made me, I don't know if conflict is exactly right, but that may be more limiting than the definition of deceptive and fraudulent synthetic media. So maybe it's just something for you to consider, whether that is
Yeah.
more limiting than you intended.
Okay.
So with that, I guess I wish you all the best. You're going to need, and I really do appreciate your willingness to wrestle with this. These are difficult matters.
Well,
Yes.
they're more difficult because it's evolving.
Yes.
It's more difficult because our media platforms don't yet seem to have the ability to be able to decipher what's true and what's not true. Because ideally, in an ideal world, you wouldn't want them by anything that was not true, right? I mean, ideally, you want them to only be buying things, even if you don't agree with the position, you at least know it's a real person saying it.
That's right.
And I think that's what's hard, is that it's an evolving, so, for more broadcasters, it's just, I don't support knowingly paying money or being paid money to run something that we know is knowingly false. And
Senator Whitehouse.
Yeah, so one of my bigger concerns is less, whether Senator White's hair is brown or red, and more, is there a foreign entity interfering in our election using AI? And I wonder, and what I'll say is, like, the Romanian presidential election was recently invalidated because and stopped because Russia was using AI to interfere with their election. Like, this is not.
Yeah.
But I wonder if Beeford has done any analysis of that risk.
No,
Okay.
we haven't as an organization. I know that there are entities in the world that have at least done some analysis of that. And it is a growing threat, as with all of this. And again, I think there's question about whether some nations or other entities out there may benefit as much from chaos and public distrust of democratic institutions as with the election of any particular individual. And that is very disheartening and concerning for sure. So Vermont may not be the place that is going to be on the absolute cutting edge of trying to figure out the best possible response and way to enforce against that. I understand that with limited resources, but I think I totally agree with you that this is a very, very serious concern.
And my concern and the reason why I would support more of a prohibition or holding accountable those who knowingly spread that information is that, the Russian government is not going to label it, and we're not gonna hold them accountable, like, they're just gonna do it.
I think there's every reason to believe that's true.
Yep.
Or whatever government it is that, whatever foreign entity, we have no proverbial stick to hold them accountable. Like, okay, so we charge them, I don't even know what the fine is in here, they don't pay it, they just keep
So
doing
what?
it, like, for what?
There's no serious enforcement here.
Well, there might be for Becca, but not for the Russian government. And that's where, like, I feel like there has to be something beyond the individual accountability.
You make a compelling point.
And it may not, of course, even being able to trace it to a foreign government per se is another hurdle that you never,
Then what?
never, yeah, I mean, you do. We may know that such things don't happen in Russia without the support of the Russian government, but these may be independent entities too. There are also very wealthy people out there who just want to create
Well, we just heard about one.
chaos.
Are there?
I'm sorry to burst your bubbles.
Well, thank you for coming in and thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it. Thank you. So committee, I'm feeling like we're, I don't know, stuck in the mud again, but we're wading through some serious issues. I mean, the other alternative is to not do the bill this year and see what happens, on the national landscape, or do it, but do it in a way that sort of is a beginning of a process, and see what court decisions might be made in the interim and come back and tweak it if we need to, again, in the future. Senator Clarkson.
I would propose that you formally ask the Secretary of State and the AG's office to come back, put their heads together with whoever else they deem appropriate, and come back to us with their thoughts and a recommendation.
Okay. I have no problem doing
Yeah.
that.
That makes sense, because the AG would have to defend it, so I
The
do
AG
think
has
that
to
we have to
defend
hear
it.
from the.
I don't
AG.
disagree there either.
And I think I'm quite torn now. I think I am torn between a prohibition and, I think the labeling of it is,
Well, if it was a prohibition, this bill doesn't apply, so we have to do something
Right.
else.
I don't think we can turn this bill into a prohibition. if
We
so
could,
choose.
if we choose. Senator White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel like at this moment in time, when I think about the makeup of the Senate, that there's a much better opportunity for us to move something that is a smaller incremental step forward than maybe as far as we might want to go on this issue. And I would hope that we do actually really take up this bill and vote it out of committee, ideally before the crossover period. And I am open with it being slimmer, having the recommendations from the broadcasters, because I do think it's much better for us to get something in now to at least get the wheels in motion. And I don't necessarily see our colleagues in the Senate moving forward on a bill that is a prohibition yet. I don't think we have that. But that's just my temperature check, and I'm all about incrementalism, although that it can fail us. So
you're not all about incremental.
on this one,
And you are surprisingly pragmatic on this, right? And I think you may be absolutely right.
I
I
want
would
red hair
still
now.
like to hear from the AG and the Secretary of State
Well,
in terms of their
I
recommendation.
had hoped that was already gonna have taken place, but apparently we need to check in again. Attorney Sagal, would you like to join us?
yeah,
I just came
Or
in
would
case
you rather just remain where you are?
No, I can join. I came in case you needed me.
Sure.
My ears were burning.
we did.
So I decided to come in.
Well, we had a more pre-raging discussion than perhaps we should have.
It's okay. Rick Sagal, Office of Legislative Counsel, and I'm glad to answer questions. I was listening a little bit, didn't catch everything, but
We had one specific question around the definition of synthetic media, and I think that Mr. Burns had brought up kind of maybe a slight tension between that definition and a previous definition. Was it the definition of synthetic media, and what was the other definition? It was disclosure. So I think the point being that, yeah, if you would.
Section 2031, lines 16 through 19. And then on line 7, on page 2, it defines what synthetic media is again, and that includes just the reference to candidate, but not anybody else. And it seems as though that first definition is to influence the outcome of the election, which could be a budget question and not have anything to do with a candidate, or to otherwise deceive a voter, whatever that means. So the two seem to be maybe not directly in conflict, but at least it could probably be teased out a little better.
So, okay. My gosh, now. So of course, synthetic media is defined by itself, and this deceptive and fraudulent synthetic media is describing what kind of synthetic media this bill believes to be deceptive and fraudulent. Now, I have not read it in the last few minutes. It could be that these definitions are in conflict, but my guess is that this bill is not targeting all synthetic media, right?
It's only
It just-
targeting deceptive.
Deceptive, and we're defining deceptive here as election type of advertisements that are deemed to be those three, which I agree, these can be pretty vaguely interpreted, deceive a voter, right?
I see what you're saying. So you
Yeah.
could use AI, maybe you want a lovely AI background on your political ad, but that wouldn't necessarily rise. It might fall under the synthetic media definition, but it
Correct.
might not rise to deceptive and fraudulent because it's not attempting to compel
Right.
in some.
And as it applies to an election.
Okay.
Right, that's correct. We're kind of further explaining this is synthetic media. It's like this thing made, that makes an individual speech appearance intentionally or, with digital technology. That is one thing. Here's what we're going to do with that when it comes to election ads. Don't deceive a voter. Don't change the outcome of an election using synthetic media.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was there anything else while you were listening that you wanted to make us aware of?
Again, I didn't hear all of it. I apologize.
That's all right.
I did receive the proposed language. Tim
Oh.
Devlin gave it to me, the broadcaster suggestions.
Yep.
That's, these.
Oh,
these are very,
Dylan's come back in now.
I think that this is, if the committee wants to go in this direction, this is something we can easily make an amendment with.
The ones that made that week.
Yes.
And there were few additions to this too, I think. Weren't there?
Well, there were other entities that had suggested changes. Nick Sherman, who came in representing AT&T.
Yeah.
Dylan was in for,
Dylan's.
forgive me for not remembering, Dylan.
NACDA.
And there was another one that I can't remember now, but I have them all here somewhere. So my hope again was to get a meeting together with the interested parties to come up with suggested changes to the bill. But apparently that hasn't, to my knowledge, at least, it hasn't happened. Bill,
For the record, Bill was meeting with Leonard Public Affairs. I did meet with the Secretary of State's office yesterday. We had a productive conversation. I think believe there's a path forward on some language, but I recognize there are other parties that they also would like to meet with. So I'm optimistic.
was it a solo meeting with you and the secretary?
It was just me on behalf of NACDA and this.
Ah.
So as far as I know, they have not been able to meet with the broadcasters. That may have met with other interested parties.
Okay.
Or with the AG,
Yeah, we haven't,
because.
you're right, we should include them. Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you. That's new information. I didn't have it.
So the other one we do have, of course, is NAPCA's input. But did you have additions to Wendy's memos?
Yeah, our request was covered under the Vermont Association of Broadcasters. They may have had some additional requests that we have no comments on.
Okay. Well, I'll do my best to speak directly with Lauren. Was it Lauren Hibbert? Whom you met?
Yes, and one.
And Sean Sheehan, maybe?
Yes.
Okay. And certainly invite the Attorney General's office to also be involved in the meeting and see if we can, because in the bill, there is some exemptions, or they call them exceptions. For those of you that have the bill, it's on page 3. line 14, and then it continues for quite a while to the
Yep.
next page. And I don't know whether that language captures what it needs to, or whether there needs to be further,
Right.
changes to it.
I think there were requests for first change. Here, which Wendy's memo has some very specific.
Correct.
Yeah.
One of them, which I found interesting, was pitch or
Oh,
pace.
yeah.
And I don't have an issue putting both of them in there, I
I
guess.
agree.
I don't know exactly.
I think.
I understand the difference. Pace is like, would you have this fast and nobody can understand you anymore. And pitch is where the difference.
It can't be on the pitch of a dog whistle.
Well, my understanding was that was specifically around what the disclosure would be, so that,
Oh,
so that you couldn't make the disclosure like at the end of a tobacco
Yes.
commercial, like, and the Surgeon
Do you
General.
remember the Micro Machines guy? That's what I think of.
Yeah.
My dating myself, very fat. Yeah, if you Google Micro Machines advertisements, the guys talk really fast.
Yeah.
And that was his. So that's what you'd be trying.
That's like pharmaceutical
Yeah.
too.
any sort of
Pharmaceutical
engineering.
ad.
Yeah,
Mangum does a thing on TV where they sell vehicles. And
Yeah.
I couldn't possibly speak that quickly.
Yeah.
But I could understand them. That's.
and I was gonna, if I made sure, Senator Host had a question last time about, you asked if we had a bill last year about deepfakes as far as pornography, and we did pass a bill. I just wanted to make the committee aware of it. It was a Michelle Childs bill.
Ah.
It was the disclosure of sexually explicit images without consent. So the current law defines a visual image as a photograph, film, videotape, recording, or digital reproduction. The last year's bill added, including an image created or altered by digitization.
Okay.
So we're slowly starting to update the statutes to address AI. And this was in a criminal sense, as far as people disclosing sexually explicit images that they've created using AI or some other digital tool.
And that's blanket, not just in relation to elections.
Yes,
Right.
this is
That's what I thought.
if you want, it's 13 VSA 2606, if you want.
Let me, if I could move to, another witness on this act, potential act. Chris Gilrain, who's the executive director of, Massachusetts and Northeast Tech. And, welcome in, Chris, and thank you for your patience. We're running just a little bit behind, but I think you were on and heard hopefully most of the discussion that's gone on.
I was and I did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and appreciate you allowing me to zoom in to the committee today. I submitted testimony on behalf of TechNet. We are a trade association comprised of nearly 100 companies throughout the innovation ecosystem, and I represent them in New England and New York. What we are seeking is just minor adjustments to the legislation to align with laws that we've seen in other states, as well as existing campaign finance disclosure laws in Vermont. We believe that AI has the potential to help us solve some of the greatest challenges of our times. Meanwhile, recognizing and addressing the genuine risks associated with these tools is crucial for its development and deployment. S23 is an example of identifying a known risk related to AI and leveraging existing law to apply a proportional remedy, and we appreciate that. Similar to the law that was just referenced regarding the digitally changed images as it relates to sexually explicit material. We fully support the intent of this legislation. We agree that individuals should be held responsible for the creation and dissemination of election material intended to deceive or defame. We've supported similar measures in other states. And as I said, we're just seeking alignment with those other states. At its core, we are seeking changes to ensure that the liability for disclosing the use of AI in election communications remains on the person who created and disseminated that material with the intent to deceive, not on the tools used to create it, not on the tubes and wires that carry it, or the platforms that person may choose to post on. That's consistent with other obligations under 17 VSA Chapter 35 and with other states that have approached AI regulation in the realm of election communications. with that, I'm happy to take questions and provide any answers that I can.
So I'm looking at the testimony that you submitted, Chris, and that it would be subsection 5 is what you're, I think, referencing with the respect to not applying. But I'm a little curious about 6. This act shall not restrict the ability of a person to detect, prevent, respond to,
Yeah.
or protect against security incidents, et cetera, et cetera. I don't exactly know what that means.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, our primary concern is with the liability. We have pitched number 6 in other states just to ensure that we're not tying the hands of any users of these tools who can use them to, in fact, detect whether or not something is AI generated for the purposes of fraud detection or catching people in the act of doing these things.
Okay. Senator Bohasky.
So the inclusion of 6 seems to indicate that there are tools to detect AI generated images and content. Because we've heard from a few people that there are not.
Well,
But-
we heard that the New York Times doesn't have such a vehicle.
Well,
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I would say that yes, we have members who are developing tools that can, with a certain degree of confidence, catch these things some of the time. But these things are always changing, and so you're always going to have to develop and continue to fine tune your technology. The people who are trying to deceive you are going to fine tune theirs, and it's going to be a constant battle. So yes, we want to make sure that people can use these tools to catch these incidents, but we don't want to place the liability on companies to have to be forced to catch this all of the time, because that technology to catch it with 100% degree of certainty does not exist.
Right, but the knowingly standard would apply. If you ran it through the tool and the tool said it's not AI generated and you put it up on your platform, like you didn't know. But
So-
there is responsibility to check.
Again, it is depending on how far the technology has developed. We may or may not have enough of a degree of certainty, but also even with having the knowingly standard, right, you are putting the liability on these companies to procure that technology, to make sure that it is perhaps the best that they can get. And again, it's a liability that does not exist under any of the other election disclosure laws in Vermont or elsewhere, right? Like on your campaign finance laws, it is up to the committee, the election committee or the candidate to provide that disclosure. We're not forcing private entities to be the arbiter of your election campaign finance laws.
I think this is wholly different. Like my campaign finances are my individual, they're not being blasted out fraudulently across to hundreds or thousands of people. Like it's a completely different, like you're comparing apples to bananas. Like they're not the same thing.
I mean, I think I was comparing different different sections of chapter 17 or chapter 35, but I would think that particularly in relation to political communications, I just want to take a step back and think, right, how problematic it might be to put private companies in the position of determining what is or is not a deceptive campaign ad, right? Do you really want that kind of middle ground between you and the voters that you're trying to reach by somebody at a platform being able to slap a label on something saying that this is or is not deceptive based on?
I actually would like a private entity to have to check and tell me if they're putting something out that is deceptive.
well, that goes back to our broadcasters discussion.
I know it's hard.
Like, I know we don't have a strong history of holding private companies accountable, but I don't know that that is a good reason to continue not to do so.
Right,
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
Senator White.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would say, Mr. Gilran, and I apologize if I mispronounced your last name. Gilren. But I am so unpersuaded by tech CEOs that unfortunately, I think your testimony actually compels me to feel that we need to do something stronger than less. I mean, when I look at your members, whether it's Meta, Google, Uber, Grubhub, Cisco, I mean, like, these are our largest, wealthiest corporations who have the most ability. You have Amazon and Apple. I mean, that group alone, I think, should have some ownership of the problem as the facilitators. However, I don't think local journalists do. So I don't know if there's a way to separate them out. But I do find it so uncompelling to have a tech CEO represent an organization say that they should be exempt. In comparison to what we've heard from local journalists. So, well, I appreciate you coming in and presenting to us. I think, unfortunately, it's kind of had the opposite effect for me.
Senator Clarkson.
But my dear, they're all included in the broadcasters.
I know, that's my problem.
Well, this is the problem I have, and I've had. And it is that many of these are the best financed and most cutting edge companies in the internet sphere. Yeah, and quite honestly, our broadcasters are being paid to take these ads. So, I mean, there is a commercial transaction happening here. And if you're willing to benefit from taking something that is a lie, knowingly a lie, and that you can identify as a lie, that is a real problem for me. Fundamentally, that is a real problem for me. And it goes to Paul's erosion of trust with the American people. And how do we reestablish trust in their media? So they see it on television, they believe it, right? So maybe you shouldn't be seeing it on television if it's a lie. And they're benefiting from it. I mean, they're being paid to run these ads. Why should we allow people to be paid for running falsehoods?
Well, you've got the FCC involved on top, if it's the broadcast.
I hear you, but I also think this is one of our challenges here.
Okay. Yeah. Chris, let me ask it a different way, if I could. The bill as introduced, you feel does not cover what you're asking us to consider. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, what we are seeking is an addition into the exemptions section. Correct.
Okay.
And that's this.
Okay.
Is that, and the exemptions, the additional exemptions you want are 5 and 6.
Correct. I did also pick up some of the conversation regarding the definition of deceptive media, and I do think that we can send you some information from other states whereby the definition is not limited just to candidate. It's regarding an individual, and then the intent is more limited to elections and candidates. And I think that that would address what VPIRG's concern was.
Okay.
I'd like
That
to
would
see
be
that
appreciated.
extended.
Sure.
And where are you based in New York?
I'm in Massachusetts.
Oh, you're in Mass. I'm sorry, I thought I heard you say you're.
Does anyone else have questions for Chris? Or do you have any additional testimony to offer, Chris?
That is it. I'm happy to provide that additional definition, and we'll provide some more in writing as well.
I think we'd appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks.
for sure. Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. And you're welcome to stay on if you like.
Thank you.
We
So,
talked to Senator Sanders, Welch, and Representative
yeah, well,
Balance Officer.
they're doing 2:45, but I think they're all gonna be on Zoom.
Okay. Well,
So,
given the weather.
well, I think that was already set up on Zoom. So we have another, well, depending on how long a break you want, we have another 5 minutes and we take a 10-minute break, or we can break now for 15, but I don't want to keep our federal delegation waiting. So, and I don't think we're going to vote this out today.
No, I'm just very curious that the AG hasn't waited.
Well, and that might have been an oversight on my
No.
part, that I didn't necessarily invite Jerry Clark's office. Okay, did you have anything else for us, Dylan? No? Okay,
Did you hear tech?
I didn't.
well, you probably already,
I have read there.
yeah, okay. I mean, it seems like. Just a comment I'll keep to myself.
We could go off of it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, I think there's a lot to consider here.
Yeah,
That's what I was gonna
I do
say. Moving forward, again, I don't know whether we just take what was offered and I signed on to the bill. I was a sponsor. As was, the Senator
As we all are.
Malinowski. So it's a tripartisan effort to at least put a lasso around this. The argument, it seems to me, in committee is how wide a net we want to cast. And whether it's better to just let it go and see what happens and tweak it later.
And
Or
start,
to-
yeah, take a first step. But so this may just be a first step where we don't necessarily get all the things that we want and that we just build on it.
I do want to hear from the Attorney General
Sure.
about what she believes she could defend. Because I, as you know, believe in taking the best first step.
I agree with you. I'm with you.
I know you are.
And I'll be interested to see what comes out of that meeting with all the other parties. So maybe they'll come up with, one paragraph that everybody can live with. And then if, Attorney Clark can, defend it and we're all comfortable with it, maybe we'll push the bill out at some point. Even when we have 2 more weeks, I think, 2.5,
We-
3.
Yeah, the threat
We're
just
gonna
seems
make
big
a
enough.
crossover.
I think the threat just gets greater and greater.
Well, of course, just like floods.
Well, and yet we're all,
Okay, we're drifting off again, I'm sorry. Rick, are you all set?
All this, yes, all this,
Wait.
yeah, all this does. Keep
All
up
right.
with it.
So our next guests will be coming in on Zoom, the 3 members of our federal delegation
we're taking.
representatives. We won't have the luxury of having the actual